Anyone who's listening to this or reading the transcript, I'm talking with Dan Vapid. He's probably best known as part of the classic lineup of Screeching Weasel, along with Ben Weasel, John Jughead, and Dan Panic. He's also known for fronting the Methadones and a number of other bands, two of which he's currently playing with, Dan Vapid and The Cheats and the Mopes. So I want to focus a good chunk of this on those two current projects. But first, I just want some background information on you. So let's start at the beginning. I'm wondering what your childhood was like. And I asked because when I talked to John and from what I've read about Ben, they both sort of had chaotic upbringings.
Yeah, I had a very chaotic upbringing as well. Really early childhood, discovered music probably at the age of 5. I remember being in my front yard, and the neighbor across the street was telling me about Kiss, so I went over to his house and I listened to Kiss and David Bowie. It was about sometime in 1975, maybe 76. And I really, really liked Kiss a lot. And then the kid down the street was talking about the Beatles. I said, well, are they anything like Kiss? And he goes, yeah, sort of. And so I went to his house, and I didn't like the Beatles at all, actually, when I was a little kid. It wasn't until many, many years later that I liked the Beatles. They actually grew on me probably in my early 20s. But that was the starting point for me musically, and through that, I think music got me through a lot of stuff. You know, my brother had been in rehab like 3 times, so you know there was a lot of. I also had a very tumultuous kind of upbringing as well. So in a lot of ways, I kind of related to Ben on that level because. You know, my brother had also been to drug rehab, and like Ben had gone to drug rehab for 2 years. So, you know, we were from the same kind of area. You know, he lived I'm from Des Plaines. John is from one town over in Mount Prospect, and Ben.
And these are all suburban Chicago.
Yeah, this is northwest suburbs of Chicago. So Ben was from Prospect Heights, and so we're all from the general vicinity. And you know, this was at a time when most bands from Chicago were playing like hardcore, and you know those guys wanted to play stuff like the Ramones and the Dickies and the Angry Samoans, and I was really getting more into like the Buzzcocks and the Jam and like the early punk stuff.
Yeah,
I liked hardcore just fine, and I started off in a hardcore band.
Right, Generation Waste.
Sure, but I was discovering that I liked the punk music with more melody to it.
Yeah.
It started with, Bad Religion and Social Distortion, and then I went back to, like, the really early stuff, and that's when it was the Ramones and Naked Ray Gun that really kind of did it for me. Musically speaking, yeah, it just kind of was an evolution of a lot of, heavy metal, rock during childhood, and that evolved into speed metal, probably when I was about 13. And the guys in Metallica were wearing hardcore shirts. They were wearing Misfits.
Right, the Misfits and Black Flag stuff.
Sure. And I was, of course, I wanted to know what that was since those guys were listening to it. And then when I heard hardcore, I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And then from there, I kind of really got into the really early stuff. And that was kind of how it evolved. But, during that whole period of time, I was also like that kind of kid that was into heavy metal that was kind of afraid to admit that I also liked ABBA. And I liked a song by Toto. There was a Rick Springfield song I liked, and there was new wave songs I liked. And I didn't want to admit it till like I was much older.
Yeah.
And finally, I just kind of gave up, and I was like, these are good songs, and and now I just embrace all of it. But growing up, you're really image conscious, and so looking back, that's
yeah, sure. So
teenager, everything was about being punk.
I've heard there's one clip of a live Generation Waste song on YouTube that I've seen. Did anything from that band get a proper recording or a release?
We had a demo tape. Back then, bands had demo tapes that they would sell at their merch table. It was really common, a demo cassette tape. And so we had one of those, and it sold really well at the time. When we played with all kinds of pretty known bands at the time. I mean, we played with the early version of Screeching Weasel quite a few times. We had played with the Exploited. We had played with Corrosion of Conformity, Reagan Youth. the adolescence. We played with all kinds of bands, and it was a really good exposure for me to, and good experience as a first band. But ultimately, what I found out is I was more interested in doing, like
the melodic stuff.
I was really into like, hey, I like this punk stuff with melody to it.
Yeah.
Was really attracted to that. And the only people at the time that were really into doing that was, Ben and John and Screeching Weasel. So that's how that whole thing kind of fell into place.
Yeah. And I guess Generation Waste ended around 89, and then that was the same year that you joined Screeching Weasel and formed Sludgeworth. Is that right?
It's kind of right. It's more like 88.
88, okay.
Yeah. Generation Waste broke up sometime in 88. And then there was a period of time I was trying to put some bands together. I was trying to put a band together, and it just wasn't, nothing was kind of taken off. I couldn't find the right people. I had one band, it's not even really worth mentioning. We didn't even play, so it was that, it was just like a year of trying to figure it out, and finally some stuff had fallen into place by the time I put Sludgeworth together, and, and had asked me if I wanted to join Screeching Weasel, and I was really excited about that because I was a big fan of Boogada 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 at the time. So it was pretty exciting. So I was kind of playing in my favorite band in a way.
Yeah. During my research for this, I found a show poster from 1990 for a place called Number One Soul. And the lineup was Sludgeworth, Chia Pet, and Trenchmouth. Now, do you remember anything about the band Trenchmouth?
Yeah, well, that's Fred Armisen.
Exactly, yeah.
Sludgeworth used to play with Trenchmouth all the time, and we played like probably 15 shows with them. So, yeah, I remember Fred.
Were you friendly with him at all?
We were friendly, sure. I mean, I didn't really hang out with him or anything, but we'd play together, and he'd be cracking jokes, and I kind of remembered him being funny. Looking back, I also remember thinking I had friends that were funnier. So when he did become famous, it was like one of those things where I was a little surprised, I guess. It's like, wow, that guy made it, How
did you find, are you a fan of Saturday Night Live? Like, do you watch it regularly?
No, I'm really not a fan of Saturday Night Live too much. I think the show has really gone downhill, for many years.
Yeah.
A lot of it just seems forced to me. I mean, I barely ever laugh watching it.
Yeah, I haven't really watched since Will Ferrell is on, but...
Yeah, he was funny, and Chris Farley had a couple good skits and stuff like that. And before, when I was a kid growing up, like, the John Belushi stuff was pretty classic, but, overall, I think the show kind of stinks.
Yeah. Yeah. He's
really funny though. And
yeah.
Like he's on like a Euro trip and all that. And he's really good in that.
Yeah, and he got Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols to be on the show. I heard sometime in this past season, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
Okay, so you actually started writing the earliest Mopes songs with B-Face when he was with the Queers. And you were playing second guitar for them. Is that story correct?
Yeah, that would be correct. It's sort of correct, because if you're just talking about the first EP, then yeah, that's correct. We had been on tour, and we were, at the time we were kind of listening to a lot of like Goofy Greats kind of stuff, and like just the novelty kind of music of the 60s. And that's kind of how that whole thing transpired.
Right.
And it was meant to just do one time, and that's that. And everybody was like, "Oh, we gotta do another one. We gotta do another one." I had songs that I had written for a long time, and so they were just kind of sitting there. And so basically, the accident waiting to happen is, half of that record is probably, songs that I had laying around for a while that I didn't really get to use. They didn't really fit Screeching Weasel, because it was at the time, I can remember when we did Anthem for a New Tomorrow, and Ben asked me, well, do you have any songs? I said, well, I do, but they don't really fit, They just didn't sound like they would flow on that record, so I didn't really, end up showing them anything for that record.
Right, right. Yeah.
They're as old as, 93, 94, a lot of those songs, and they weren't really released till about 98.
Right. One of them, though, Squeaky Clean, that was first played as a Weasel song, because that was on the either Thank You Very Little compilation or Kill the Musicians one. I can't remember which.
Yeah, I can't either now.
So at least one of them, I guess, was deemed close enough to Weasel. But then, I was listening to that version of it and then listening to the Mopes versions of it. And, they sound totally different. The lyrics are the same, but I could see how, the way you planned it out in your head, if it was intended to sound like it did on the EP, then I could see why you would tell Ben, I have this song, but it's not really Weasel material.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there's some other stuff where it's just, I thought it was more appropriate for me to sing the song as well. Sometimes I would come up with stuff I thought he would be good at, but a lot of times there was a little bit of a disconnect, and that was the case with those songs. So those were actually kind of an old batch of songs.
Yeah. And is that why the EP sounds so different from the LP?
Yeah, it is. And because, like the story being, B-Face and I were just kind of just making up novelty songs, of like those 60s Goofy Greats kind of stuff. If you ever listen to the Goofy Greats album and then listen to that record, you go, oh, okay, I get it. It's just kind of inspired by that whole thing. And it was just meant to do one time. And that's really all I ever wanted to do with that, because I wouldn't want to be a band like that forever. You know what I mean? Yeah. I just wanted to do like 5 songs and kind of be done with it. Just be like, okay, I did that,
Right, yeah. And B-Face, by the time you guys actually recorded that, I think it was when you had left Screeching Weasel again in like 97 or so, and he had just left the Queers. And what was that? Was your departure reaction to, at that time, Weasel decided to stop touring and you just wanted to work on other projects if you're not going to be playing live?
There's a lot behind that. I mean, God, I don't even know where to begin with that. It really is a long story, but to sum it up, there was a bit of a falling out between Ben and I. Mm-hmm. And it's a really long, complicated story.
Yeah, what else is new?
Weird beat-off session, and, it's kind of involved, but it was somewhat of a falling out. And by that point, like, when we had done that record, it was the intention was to do something that was fun, because at the time, it just seemed like the band wasn't very fun. In the very early days, it was fun, and then it became so much of, in my view, like just very business and very calculated, very unfun. So that was kind of my reaction. Again, at the time, I think B-Face had gone through some stuff with Joe, and it was just kind of burnt out, and we were just like, let's just do this thing and just just have fun with it. And that was kind of the whole point of it from the start.
Yeah, and then so you guys then got Jughead and Lumley to fill out the rest of the band. Had Lumley already replaced Dan Panic in Screeching Weasel at this point? Did you ever were you guys ever bandmates in Weasel?
No, Dan Lumley and I were not. I actually can't remember if he was playing. I don't think he was.
You mean on the
Lumley was playing, and I don't think Screeching Weasel was playing at the time. I mean, because there was like many years where like the band didn't do anything.
Right.
Didn't play at all. Put out a couple records, but that was that.
Yeah. So did you just know him from his stuff with Squirt Gun and Sonic Iguana?
I knew him through Mass Giorgini, yeah.
Yeah.
So it just kind of fell into place because we knew Mass, and from Mass we had met Dan Lumley.
Did the Mopes ever do a tour?
No, we never did a tour. We had played. We played San Francisco at like some Lookout Festival once, and we had played InSub once. I think it was 2005. We had played.
Yeah, I think the first year of it.
Yeah, and then we played only a handful of times locally, like maybe 2 or 3 times. I think that's about it. We haven't played very much. We were just a band. It was just kind of like a side band, as the way the Mopes were kind of just kind of how it went. I mean, and we all, at the time, we all lived in different parts of the country. At the time, I was living in right outside of D.C. in Alexandria.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
What were you doing out there?
Oh, it was my ex-girlfriend at the time was going to school, and I just went with her. She went to Georgetown, so it's just one of those things. I just went with her, and then, I lived there for 2 years, but we broke up. I came back.
Mm-hmm.
But during the time, I lived there. B-Face lived in Boston, and, Dan Lumley lived in Lafayette. John was still living in Chicago, but he was all over the place all the time. He's always traveling. So it was just one of those bands that wasn't, you couldn't really make something like that work full time.
Yeah, so yeah.
Just kind of looked at it as a side project.
Yeah, by the way, sorry if there's any background noise in here. My dog just walked into the room. I don't know if you can hear that or not.
Well, yeah, I have a crying baby in the background. I don't know if you can hear that.
No. So that's I can't. So, okay. So then, that lineup of you and Lumley and B-Face was what would the lineup that would record the first Methadones album, right?
Me, Lumley, and B-Face. That's correct.
So, because the first LP from the Mopes was so drastically different from the EP, why did you decide to change the name of this group of musicians to the Methadones? I know you said before you felt the songs you were writing at the time weren't Mope songs.
Yeah.
Was it that Jughead wasn't involved anymore, or?
It's part of that. I think there's a couple reasons. One is that at that time in the late 90s, I was really going through an anti-pop punk phase. A lot of the stuff I was hearing at the time I didn't like. So it was kind of, in my mind, like when I started the Methadones, it was kind of a reaction to that. I wanted it a little faster. I wanted it a little darker. At the end of the day, it's funny. I kind of slowly crept back into doing, I think, what I've been doing all along and what I started with. With the Methadones, probably by the third album, we're kind of more of a pop punk band again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I guess, like, at heart, that's what I really, truly like. But I did go through that phase for a while. And I think, I see people going through that now a lot. And I'm almost wondering if, like, they'll rediscover it again later, like I did.
Yeah.
The long and the short of that is, it was kind of a reaction to that at the time. I kind of just didn't want to do that anymore. And so I did Ill at Ease. And then from there, I was like, well, then I want to do something, for a career objective. I want to do something more like Dictators or Turbo Negro. And I did that. And then there was a couple songs on there that were kind of still like pop punk songs. And I liked those the best, And by our third album, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to try. I'm just going to do what's kind of coming out naturally. And that's what it was all along. So, it's just one of those things I went through at the time. Yeah.
Did you approach John at all about being on the first Methadones record? Because the whole Riverdales thing where he was the only one left out.
Yeah, I honestly don't really remember what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to ask him.
Yeah, all right.
Something's going on with him at the time, like he wasn't available or something.
Doing something with his plays, focusing on theater. But
I really don't remember what it was because, by the time that I did my second record with the Methadones, I had the lineup that I had all the way to the end pretty much.
Yeah.
So.
And speaking of the Riverdales, did that seem weird, like doing that tour with Green Day where it was the three of you planned? You had this whole back catalog of Screeching Weasel songs that you'd put these years into, and now you're playing for these huge people, but you're pigeon to playing only one album's worth of material to this huge audience on the Green Day tour.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean by that. I can, like, the very first show that we had played, it was a very big festival show with Green Day, and, like, Radiohead and Beck and Foo Fighters were on the bill, and it was us opening the show. So it was very kind of, and it was during the day, so I could see all of them. It's like 10,000 people. So it was very intimidating. And I remember after the set, I was a little bummed out, thinking, at the time I was just really thinking that Screeching Weasel was much better of a band.
Yeah.
Really depressed by that. And I thought our first record wasn't that great of a record. And Ben, same way. We both kind of, looking back, we're like, man, that record really kind of stinks. But that we had got the break that we got when we got it, and, we were trying to, to do this thing as a new band. So, I think that was hard. Sometimes I think if it had been Screeching Weasel, it would have been better. Or if it was, say, the Riverdales, maybe, at a later time, maybe it would have been a little bit better. But, but you're right. Yeah, we just had that first album, so it was a little strange, yeah.
Yeah. So you were talking earlier about how sort of, you felt you had to sort of write specifically for one band. Like you'd say, oh, I wrote this song, but it's not Screeching Weasel material, so I'll save it for the Mopes. Then I wrote this song, but it's not Mopes material, so I'm gonna make it into the Methadones.
Right.
And then with the Cheats, I mean, was it the same sort of thing where the band was 3/4, or the band is 3/4 of the Methadones, and then Simon.
It's not anymore.
Oh, who left?
Mike is not.
Oh, okay.
He's not in the band anymore. So.
But at that time, did you consider, because of that, continuing using the name Methadones? Or did you feel like, this is going to be something different, these songs are going to be something different, so I'm going to go with Dan Vapid and The Cheats?
Yeah. The Methadones were just something to me where I felt the band had run its course.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think we all felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
We all liked each other. We got on each other's nerves like any band does, but we all genuinely did like each other. But it was just kind of at the point where it just felt so stale. Every time we were playing, it was hard for us to be into it. And it was that way for a while with the band. Like, I felt like we were always working on the band, and we're kind of constantly pushing it to make it work. And at one point I was just like, I don't want to make it work anymore. It doesn't seem like it just wants to do it on its own accord.
Mm.
So when it came to doing a new band, I don't know. I'm sorry. Go.
Hello?
I'm sorry. You can edit this out. But
Yeah.
Question?
No. You can. Did you want to continue with what you were saying? Or?
Well, I was going to segue into my band now, but
well, I wanted to go ahead because the next thing I wanted to say was you guys have. Well, first off, let me talk about the first album that the Cheats did. And to me, that sounds like it could have been almost like a mixtape of songs that you've written for your various bands. Like some of the stuff like Girl Group, it would sound like something from the Mopes EP, and then, these other songs would sound like a Screeching Weasel thing, or like a Riverdales thing. Was this a conscious effort, or did some of those songs originate as songs meant for other bands?
Well, a couple of them were supposed to be Riverdale songs, but the Riverdales broke up, so I had some songs.
And which ones were those?
They were the song "Baby, Baby, Get Over Yourself."
Mm-hmm.
I Just Want to Be Happy. It Lives by Night, and I had one more that was going to be a Riverdale song. I'm trying to think of what it was. I think it may have been song "Torture Chamber."
Okay.
And so I had those songs, and they were intended to be Riverdale songs, and the Riverdales had broken up. And the way I looked at it is I would do a record and not. I figured, well, I'd like to release these songs. I really liked them, so I thought the way to approach it would be to just to kind of do whatever I wanted to do now, and not so much niche writing. I think that's what happens when you're in a band. You kind of, you have to kind of ride that style, and after a while, it just kind of, you burn out. It gets kind of stale. So
yeah.
What I had thought for this is if it sounds like a Riverdale song, fine. Sounds like a Screeching Weasel song, fine. Sounds like a Methadone song, or even like something completely different, that's fine. I'm just going to give myself the liberty to do that, and not have to write for a specific band. So if it sounds like a mixtape, I think that's cool. It wasn't really I guess it was somewhat intentional, but it also just kind of comes natural. It's a lot easier to just kind of approach it that way than you just kind of have to work with the parameters that you have in a band. You know what I mean? So I just kind of just wrote what I felt like writing.
Yeah, and is the second album gonna be like that as well?
Yeah, there's some elements that are kind of like the first album, and then there's some elements that are just, also, unlike the first album.
So when is that gonna be out?
The release date is July 30th.
Okay, and what label's putting it out?
That's our label, Torture Chamber Records. So we put out our own records now.
Oh, that's cool. Do you plan on releasing any other bands or just your stuff?
We had talked about it, but it's kind of an issue of time and money.
Yeah.
So, it's possible that we will, but for now we're just kind of focusing on our own stuff.
And is there going to be a tour after that, too?
We're doing, this month we're playing we're playing Dayton, Ohio, and playing Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then we're playing the Southgate House right outside of Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing in-sub all this month. And in August, we go out to the West Coast. And then there were some plans to go to Europe in October. They're still kind of getting worked on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the year, we're still kind of working out.
Yeah.
We're keeping busy though.
Is everyone in the band like you have a family and kids where it gets a lot harder to tour?
No, but they do have jobs.
Oh. So that also makes it hard to tour.
Yeah, I'm a drummer in my band is a manager of a Whole Foods.
Mm-hmm.
My guitar player does, layout, so he, a graphic designer.
Mm-hmm.
So he does, he works out of home, and my bass player is also a graphic designer, but for a bank, so he has to kind of work in a cubicle. But, so we have to work. We do as much as we can do with where we're at in our lives.
Yeah.
We manage to do about 30, 40 shows a year.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So, that's as much as we can do with this lineup. If I wanted to try to get some other people, maybe, but...
you like who you're playing with?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They're all really good friends.
Yeah. So, let's get back to songwriting. You said that when you were writing for the Riverdales, you tried to think about how Dee Dee Ramone would write a song. Was that a Riverdale specific thing, or because the band, was meant to sound a lot like the Ramones? Or do you try to channel other specific musicians' writing styles when you're working on songs for your other bands?
Yeah, definitely. I have a song on the last Riverdales album called I Don't Want to Live Forever, and I thought what it would be like if Dee Dee Ramone and Paul Collins from The Beat wrote a song, and I wrote that song. I was like, what would they do if they got together and had a conversation, So that was kind of my approach on that. But yeah, I don't think, you got to allow yourself to still kind of be you and be creative. And sometimes if you're really trying to sound like a certain thing, you won't. You'll do a poor job at it.
Yeah.
So I think that's... So I've always been a big fan of the Ramones, but I'm also a fan of a lot of music. And it does make its way in there. Yeah,
and there was one interview I was reading when they were asking you about some of your songwriting influences. And, you mentioned a bunch of musicians, and then you said George Carlin, which I think is really cool. So can you give an example of a song where I guess his sort of outlook on life or the way that he works with words influenced the lyrics?
No, I don't think I can give you an example. I just think, when it comes to, I think what I may have said is that there's, certain, just people that are just have inspiring things, like George Carlin, the Dalai Lama, or, Albert Einstein, I think I may have said. They always really have great quotes. I can't really give you an example with George Carlin at the top of my head, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's just, I find him just the way he can see the world to be pretty unique and influential in a way. I mean, there's, it can't be duplicated.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's kind of cool about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So when you're writing this new Cheats album, are there specific people or whether it be songwriters. I know in the past you said you were influenced by the movie Falling Down. What were the influences when you were writing these new batch of songs?
There's a lot. It's kind of funny because it's really, again, all over the place, and they're really small bits and pieces of lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also like, I'm really into like the early pop stuff. Pop stuff from the 60s I liked a lot, and like a lot of rock and roll from the 60s and the 50s, and that classic songwriting.
Yep.
And the early punk movement, and then the new wave. But I also like a lot of indie music. I mean, I really love the Weaker Thans and Jets to Brazil, and I like Elliott Smith a lot, and I like Rhett Miller a lot, and the old 97s. So a lot of those guys as well. I'm really big fan of Death Cab for Cutie. I know that surprises some people, but I absolutely love him. And I think he's a really fantastic songwriter, and I think, a lot of it, those guys are also kind of influential in a smaller way. I really appreciate what they do. It doesn't really give like the kind of influence that's going to directly affect the sound, but there's certain ways that they might approach things that will affect the way I may approach a song. Does that make sense? Like they'll do certain things in terms of like dynamics or how they fill out the sound or what they're going to do for a backing or a keyboard, or maybe the way they approach a lyric that I really find influential. I still keep my guitars loud and I still kind of keep it abrasive and melodic, but there might be certain things that some of these bands have that will make an impact, make it that tend to influence. So it's kind of bits and pieces of like lots of stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question. That was kind of a rant there.
No. It makes sense. So we've passed 40 minutes, so I'll just ask a couple more questions and then let you go. So the famous moment where you're passively aggressively waving your hand in dismay at Ben at that last Screeching Weasel show has become entrenched in my mind, alongside the video of a miserable Johnny Rotten asking if you've ever got the feeling that you've been cheated at the last show the Sex Pistols did with Sid Vicious. And I actually read Rotten's book recently, and he said, the two of them ended up speaking once after that show. They got into an argument about his drug use, and then the two of them never spoke again. Do you see the same scenario with you and Ben, where you're never going to be on speaking terms?
I don't really have any reason to talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot. I'm not really angry about it anymore, but I was angry about it for a really long time.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then to end this on a happier note, you and Jughead had a falling out when you and Ben had reformed the band without you. And then after you left, what was the reconciliation process where now the two of you are going to be playing together in the Mopes again?
He just kind of reached out. He was doing an interview for his podcast, and he kind of reached out, said, hey, just want to see how everything was going, reaching out. But I just immediately just dropped it. I didn't really have anything against him to begin with. So I think it was just one of those things. He just felt upset that I had joined the band again, and he felt like I was doing it without him,
Yeah.
And it was never like a conspiracy, me and Ben were trying to get rid of John, it just wasn't, it's just not the way it was. I just think it just kind of came with just maybe time and putting some stuff into perspective.
Mm-hmm. And who came...
Now we're fine. We don't really talk about it. I think it's one of those things where we're just like, okay, well, it's just one of those bumps in the road, I guess.
Who came up with the idea to reform the Mopes for the Insubordination Fest show?
That came up in a Facebook thread. Somebody had said something about having the Mopes play Insubordination Fest, and I said, well, I'd be down if they were. And then Chris Thacker sent me a private message, and that was I had been in contact with John recently and been in contact with B-Face recently, and I thought they would be interested, so I asked them, and they were.
Mm-hmm. And is Lumley going to be playing drums as well?
No, Lumley is not playing in the band just because last time in 2005 when I had asked him, he just said he he was more into like going back to playing metal.
Really?
Yeah, he's really into metal a lot. And so he was just like, hey, that's cool, thanks for asking me guys, but yeah, I just kind of want to stick to playing metal again. I'm like, okay, that's cool.
So who's drumming now?
It's a drummer that I had in the Methadones and then Dan Vapid The Cheats, Mike Susi.
Okay, yeah. Oh, okay, so it was the other Mike that left the Cheats.
Mike Byrne.
Yeah, okay. All right, great. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Is there anything else that you'd like to say or like to plug before I let you go?
Yeah, I guess just Dan Vapid and The Cheats record, available on Torture Chamber Records. The record will be called 2, TWO, to be released July 30th, available digitally and on vinyl and CD formats. Look through it on Interpunk, Bandcamp, or maybe even your local record store. Hopefully we'll have it in there for you this time around. So just, that basic information on the record, and, we'll see you at INSUB. Should be fun.
All right, thanks a lot, Dan.